First sight of the beast. September 17th, 1942. Near Mga, east of Leningrad. A brittle chill clung to the air, and the forested terrain was pocked with the scars of months of relentless artillery fire. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov, commanding a platoon of T-34s, crouched in the underbrush, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Smoke curled from the horizon as German formations advanced, but what caught his attention was something entirely new, something that made his seasoned crew instinctively hold their breath. The massive silhouette of a Tiger WAZ tank. The Tiger Hohenschon, fresh from Henschel's factories in Kassel, Germany, had arrived on the Eastern Front as part of the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion. Its sheer size, over 56 tons of steel, and the familiar glint of the 88mm KWK-36 gun immediately set it apart from the Panzer IIIs and IVs that Soviet crews had learned to counter. Petrov's first thought was disbelief. "It can't be," he muttered under his breath, scanning the distance. "No gun we have can touch that armour." As the Tiger lumbered forward, the ground itself seemed to tremble. The crew of T-34s tried to manoeuvre, aiming at the weaker side plates, but shells bounced off with sickening thuds. Each ricochet reinforced a grim reality. The Tiger was not just a tank, it was a fortress on treads. The 88mm gun could obliterate T-34s before they even closed to effective range, leaving Soviet units scrambling for cover behind the ruins of shattered villages and scorched forests. The first engagement near Mga was chaotic. Several Soviet T-34s attempted flanking maneuvers, only to be met with precise fire that shredded engines, turrets, and tracks. Smoke, fire, and the metallic screech of twisting steel filled the air as soldiers shouted, fired, and dove for cover. Petrov, peering through the periscope of his T-34, saw comrades' tanks burn in bursts of orange flame. The scale of destruction was unlike anything he had witnessed before, and the heavy Tiger, despite mechanical issues that caused occasional stalling, moved with deliberate menace across the frozen terrain. German radio operators communicated with terse efficiency. Captain Otto Carius, commanding one of the Tigers, relayed orders to press forward on specific objectives, while engineers monitored the mechanical reliability of their new weapon. Not every Tiger performed perfectly. Several experienced gearbox malfunctions and track misalignments, yet even the partially functioning tanks inspired panic among Soviet troops. The combination of psychological intimidation and overwhelming firepower became immediately evident. This was not merely a battle of numbers, but of engineering and terror. Soviet officers had to rethink tactics on the spot. Petrov called for concentrated artillery fire on the Tiger's weak points, aiming at observation ports and the lower hull. Infantry squads were instructed to avoid open fields, to utilize forests, ditches, and urban ruins to minimize exposure. Still, every attempt to neutralize the Tiger was met with limited success. It became painfully clear that standard anti-tank guns, including the 45mm and even some 76.2mm field pieces, were almost entirely ineffective at long range. The concept of armoured superiority was being rewritten in real time, and Soviet doctrine had to adapt. The psychological impact on Soviet crews cannot be overstated. Reports later noted trembling hands on the controls of T-34s, whispered fears about iron monsters, and hesitation in attacking formations that would have previously been routine targets. Veterans of earlier battles like Moscow and Kharkov recognized the threat, but had no experience dealing with a tank that combined near impenetrable armor with devastating long-range firepower. Petrov, trying to steady his platoon, barked orders over the din. "Keep moving. Do not let them pin us. Flank and strike where you can." Despite mechanical failures and limited numbers, the Tiger's early actions near Leningrad had a pronounced effect on Soviet command. Units retreated, regrouped, and sent urgent dispatches to higher headquarters detailing the characteristics of the new German weapon. Reports emphasized its armor, gun range, and destructive efficiency. Intelligence officers were stunned. Photographs captured by reconnaissance units would later confirm that the Tiger's son had arrived in force, marking a turning point in the region's armoured engagements. By nightfall, Soviet units had regrouped behind fortified positions, nursing losses but absorbing critical lessons. The Tiger I, even with intermittent malfunctions, had proven itself a battlefield equalizer, capable of turning numerical advantage into vulnerability. For Lieutenant Petrov and his men, the events at Mga were both terrifying and enlightening. The German Tiger I had rewritten the rules of armoured warfare in the Leningrad sector, and the Soviets would be forced to innovate rapidly or continue to bleed men and machines in devastating encounters. The first night after the engagement was tense. Fires still burned across the fields where T-34s had fallen, their twisted metal skeletons glinting in the moonlight. Soviet engineers and officers pored over damaged armour samples, artillery impact patterns, and reports from surviving crews. Every detail mattered. How thick was the frontal armour? Which calibers could pierce it at close range? How fast could it traverse rough terrain despite its mass? These questions, now urgent, would drive the evolution of Soviet anti-tank doctrine in the months to come. Section 2. The Horror of Mga, September 18, 1942. Mga, Leningrad Front. Dawn broke with an eerie quiet over the scarred fields outside Mga. Smoke still hung in patches, remnants of the previous day's carnage. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his remaining T-34 crews huddled in foxholes, listening to the distant rumble of engines. From reconnaissance reports, they knew more Tigers were approaching. The previous engagement had left them shaken but alive, and the Soviets realized that each encounter with these new German heavy tanks carried the risk of annihilation. Petrov's platoon moved cautiously, flanking toward a grove of birches, hoping to use the trees as cover, but the terrain, riddled with craters and debris, slowed them down. Every movement seemed to draw the eyes of the Tigers, whose crews had perfected the use of sightlines and hull-down positions. Captain Otto Carius, commanding one of the operational Tigers, directed his men with calculated patience, waiting for Soviet units to enter kill zones. The 88mm gun, precise and deadly, shattered any notion of approaching in open terrain. As Soviet armour attempted to press forward, mechanical failures among the Tigers became evident. One vehicle's gearbox seized, immobilizing it across the frozen field. Another's track snapped under pressure from the cratered terrain. Despite these malfunctions, even a single operational Tiger was enough to wreak havoc. Petrov witnessed T-34 after T-34 being torn apart from distances beyond the effective reach of their main guns. Shells bounced harmlessly off the Tiger's front plates, leaving Soviet crews exposed and vulnerable. The psychological impact was devastating. Petrov's men, once confident in their ability to engage German armour, began hesitating. Hesitation in combat is lethal, and the Tigers exploited it with ruthless efficiency. Every pause, every moment spent scanning for weak points was met with accurate, devastating fire. The battlefield became a combination of chaos, fear, and mechanical calculation. The Soviets learned that brute force alone could not counter the Tiger. Infantry squads attempted to move in closer to support the tanks, using Molotov cocktails and anti-tank rifles. Their efforts met with limited success. The frontal armour of the Tiger WWII was nearly impervious to small arms and light anti-tank weaponry. Explosives thrown at the tracks could immobilize a Tiger, but doing so required exposing oneself to lethal machine gun fire from coaxial mounts and supporting Panzer IVs. Petrov's platoon quickly realized that without coordinated combined arms tactics, victory was unlikely. Reports from higher headquarters poured in. Engineers and analysts were gathering fragments of Tiger shells, armour, and eyewitness accounts. Every misfire, every malfunction, and every kill was being catalogued. Soviet intelligence officers noted that the Tiger's armour was sloped, increasing its effective thickness against standard calibers. The 88mm gun, capable of penetrating T-34s at over a kilometre, allowed German crews to engage from positions of relative safety. The Tiger was not just a weapon, it was a paradigm shift in armoured warfare. and Soviet planners had to adapt quickly or face catastrophic losses. Despite the terror, the Soviets began testing new tactics in real time. Petrov coordinated with nearby artillery units to establish overlapping fields of fire, aiming to channel Tigers into kill zones where multiple guns could engage simultaneously. Infantry squads were instructed to advance under the cover of smoke and to target vulnerable rear sections whenever possible. These early experiments, though costly, would inform Soviet anti-Tiger doctrine for the remainder of the war. By midday, the remnants of Soviet armoured units had learned a grim lesson. Even when the Tigers malfunctioned, their presence dominated the battlefield. T-34 crews adapted by dispersing, using terrain to avoid detection, and relying on mobility over firepower. Soviet officers noted that small coordinated teams could exploit the Tigers' mechanical vulnerabilities, but success required discipline, courage, and precise timing. The contrast between Soviet improvisation and German engineering discipline could not have been starker. As evening fell, Petrov's unit withdrew to reorganize, nursing damaged tanks and counting the losses from the day. Mga had become a crucible, a proving ground for both men and machines. The Tiger I had arrived, not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of fear and technological superiority. Its 88mm gun had shattered confidence, its armor had defied expectation, and its psychological impact had forced the Soviets to rethink their approach to armored engagements entirely. The surviving crews huddled around small fires, reviewing maps and discussing the day's encounters. Each story of destruction reinforced the need for adaptation. Petrov's voice, though strained, carried authority. We cannot fight them as we fought the Panzer IVs. Every move must be calculated. Every shot must count. We will learn their weaknesses, and we will survive. But we must respect the monster before us. In the aftermath of Mga, Soviet armored doctrine began its painful evolution. Engineers analyzed Tiger armor, artillery officers recalculated firing tables, and tank commanders devised new formations, emphasizing mobility, flanking, and combined arms tactics. The Tiger I, even in limited numbers and with mechanical faults, had left an indelible mark on the Leningrad front, a warning of the lethal combination of German engineering, firepower, and tactical discipline. Section 3. The shock of the 88mm, late September 1942. Mga, Leningrad front. The sun barely pierced the grey clouds, casting a cold, diffuse light over the shattered terrain. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov surveyed the field from behind a ruined brick wall, his T-34 resting in a shallow ditch. Around him, the remains of earlier skirmishes, twisted metal, scorched earth, and the faint odour of burned fuel served as grim reminders of the Tiger I's destructive capacity. The day's objective was simple: probe the German lines, test anti-Tiger tactics, and if possible, recover intelligence from disabled vehicles. Yet the presence of the 88mm gun loomed large in every calculation. Known for its legendary penetration, the KWK-36 had already destroyed multiple T-34s in previous encounters, and Soviet crews had yet to find an effective counter at distance. The combination of precision, range, and psychological intimidation made it a weapon unlike any other encountered on the Eastern Front. Petrov's unit advanced cautiously, hugging the cover of birch trees and craters, every movement carefully coordinated with supporting infantry and artillery. Despite mechanical malfunctions among the Tigers, the ones that were operational acted as mobile fortresses. They could fire accurately while moving slowly, adjust positions with tactical patience, and absorb hits that would have destroyed lighter Panzer models. The Soviets quickly realized that they could not rely solely on frontal assaults. Their doctrine needed a complete overhaul. During one tense exchange, Petrov spotted a Tiger partially immobilized by a stuck track. He radioed his platoon. "Concentrate fire on the rear. Wait for my mark." Multiple T-34s attempted to flank the vehicle. Artillery fire pounded nearby positions, and infantry squads edged forward with anti-tank rifles and satchel charges. For a brief moment, hope flickered. The Tiger shuddered under fire, its massive 88mm gun threatening at every angle. But even immobilized, it remained a deadly threat. Its machine guns swept advancing infantry, and the sheer psychological weight of its presence slowed Soviet movements. The 88mm KWK-36 became the centerpiece of Soviet tactical assessments. Intelligence reports catalogued its armor-piercing capabilities, firing arcs, reload times, and effective range. Petrov and his officers calculated that standard 76.2mm F-34 shells would fail against frontal armor at ranges beyond 800 meters, while only concentrated artillery fire or flanking shots could pose a real threat. The combination of empirical observation and battlefield reporting began to shape new doctrines emphasizing combined arms maneuvers, ambushes, and indirect fire. In the villages surrounding Mga, Soviet infantry faced their own trials. German Tiger crews coordinated with Panzer grenadiers, using the 88mm gun to suppress both armor and foot soldiers. Every movement through open streets was met with precise, deadly fire. Soldiers who had survived the initial encounters were now forced to adapt or perish. Smoke, dust, and shattered masonry provided intermittent cover, yet the tactical supremacy of the Tiger became unmistakable. Petrov noted that Tiger Thuren crews were highly disciplined. Unlike previous German tanks, which sometimes engaged recklessly, the Tigers moved with calculated efficiency, targeting high-value threats first and conserving ammunition when possible. Even when malfunctioning, their presence commanded respect. The psychological factor, fear of the 88mm awe at the vehicle's armor, and dread of its sheer mass, was as significant as any mechanical advantage. As the day wore on, Soviet officers experimented with new formations. T-34s advanced in staggered lines, artillery batteries established overlapping fields of fire, and infantry squads coordinated to exploit terrain features. The lessons were immediate and brutal. Frontal assaults were suicidal, mobility was critical, and intelligence on enemy positions was more valuable than ever. Petrov, observing the battlefield, scribbled notes on shell impacts, track conditions, and engagement outcomes. These informal records would later feed into official tactical revisions, forming the foundation of a doctrine designed specifically to counter the Tiger's dominance. By evening, Mga had become a living laboratory of armored warfare. Tigers, even when partially disabled, had reshaped the battlefield and forced the Soviets to reconsider every assumption about tank combat. Petrov's men, exhausted and shaken, gathered in makeshift bunkers, discussing strategies for future encounters. Their experiences, combined with reconnaissance reports, laid the groundwork for systematic anti-Tiger tactics, coordinated artillery barrages, flanking maneuvers, concentrated anti-tank fire, and the use of natural and urban terrain for cover. The legacy of the 88mm gun at Mga extended beyond immediate losses. Soviet commanders understood that technological inferiority alone could not dictate defeat if combined with intelligent tactics, discipline, and adaptation. The Tiger had revealed both the limitations of existing Soviet doctrine and the potential for innovation under extreme pressure. Petrov, though wary of the next encounter, recognized that each engagement provided lessons that could, in time, turn terror into opportunity. The first encounters at Mga had left one fact clear. The Tiger I was no ordinary tank. It was a game changer, a psychological and mechanical force that demanded respect, study, and ingenuity. The Soviets, stunned by the carnage, faced a choice: adapt or continue to suffer devastating losses. For Petrov and his men, the day's experiences would shape the evolution of armored warfare on the Eastern Front, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the brutal calculus of tank combat. Section 4. Mechanical Mayhem and Lessons Learned, late September 1942. Mga, Leningrad Front. The Tiger's arrival had brought more than just firepower. It had introduced a new dimension of mechanical complexity to the battlefield. While the 88mm gun was a terror to Soviet crews, the Tiger, for instance itself, was prone to breakdowns under the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front. Frost-laden mornings, cratered roads, and relentless movement pushed the massive vehicles to the limits of their engineering. For the Soviets, these mechanical failures offered a glimmer of hope, yet exploiting them required courage and precision. Lieutenant Petrov observed from a concealed ridge as one Tiger attempted to traverse a muddy ravine. The tank's immense weight caused a track to slip, immobilizing it momentarily. Nearby, Panzer IVs pressed the advance. But even with a single Tiger out of action, the morale effect on Soviet crews was minimal. The remaining operational Tigers continued to dominate, using long-range fire to suppress infantry and T-34s alike. Every malfunction, while a tactical opportunity, was shadowed by the immediate threat posed by functioning Tigers. Soviet engineers and field officers began meticulously recording the patterns of Tiger malfunctions. Gearbox failures, engine stalls, track misalignments, and hydraulic issues were catalogued alongside environmental conditions. Petrov's men, meanwhile, learned to exploit terrain, boggy fields, narrow ravines, and urban rubble to immobilize the heavy tanks temporarily. But the effort was painstaking. Every maneuver required careful coordination, precise timing, and an acceptance of significant personal risk. The psychological impact of mechanical mayhem was profound. Soldiers witnessing a Tiger stalled or floundering momentarily felt a surge of courage, only to be tempered by the understanding that one operational 88mm gun could still wipe out multiple T-34s. Petrov's platoon adapted with a combination of stealth, speed, and ambush tactics. T-34s moved in small, dispersed units, using hold-down positions, concealed routes, and crossfire to maximize effectivenesses. Infantry squads with anti-tank rifles and satchel charges synchronized with these movements, aiming to exploit any mechanical vulnerability. Meanwhile, German crews labored to maintain their prized vehicles. Captain Otto Carius, supervising repairs, directed engineers to improvise solutions in the field. Broken tracks were replaced with makeshift components. Engines were flushed and rebuilt under fire. Gearboxes were treated with meticulous care. The heavy Tiger, though formidable, demanded constant attention. Each repair consumed time, fuel, and manpower, creating subtle openings that the Soviets sought to exploit with cautious aggression. In one dramatic engagement, Petrov's platoon observed a Tiger's main gun fail to fire due to a breech malfunction. T-34s maneuvered into a flanking position, attempting to disable the tank with concentrated fire from the rear. The engagement was tense and chaotic, with Soviet crews praying that the malfunction would hold while they executed their attack. A direct hit to the Tiger's rear engine compartment finally immobilized it, forcing German crews to abandon the tank temporarily. The victory was small but morale-boosting, proving that even the seemingly invincible Tiger had exploitable weaknesses. From the Soviet command perspective, these early battles were a trial by fire in armored warfare. Analysts compiled reports on armor thickness, gun performance, mobility limitations, and maintenance requirements. Petrov's first-hand observations became invaluable, noting where Tigers bogged down, how their 88mm guns handled sustained firing, and the typical sequence of crew procedures under stress. Each engagement contributed to a growing repository of knowledge that would eventually inform large-scale anti-Tiger strategies. By October 1942, the lessons of Mga had begun to crystallize. Mobility and flanking were essential. Frontal assaults were suicidal. Infantry, artillery, and tank units had to operate in tightly coordinated teams, using intelligence and terrain to offset the Tiger's overwhelming firepower. Psychological preparation became as important as physical readiness. Soviet crews had to overcome fear, maintain discipline, and react swiftly to the shifting battlefield. Petrov, reviewing the maps and damage reports, recognized the broader implications. The Tiger was not merely a tactical threat, but a catalyst for doctrinal evolution. Soviet armored strategy had to adapt to confront this new reality. Dedicated anti-Tiger units, combined arms operations, and relentless innovation would become the foundation of future engagements. The early encounters at Mga, though costly in blood and material, had forced the Red Army to confront technological superiority head-on and learn to survive, improvise, and counter it effectively. As night fell, the frozen fields outside Mga grew silent, the day's battles leaving only scorched earth, smoking wrecks, and weary soldiers. The Tiger I, even when partially disabled, had reshaped the battlefield. The Soviets had witnessed both the destructive potential and the mechanical fragility of this new weapon. For Petrov and his men, the coming months would test their courage, creativity, and resolve. The Tiger I had arrived, and the war for Leningrad would never be the same. Section 5. Doctrine Rewritten in Fire, October 1942. Leningrad Front. The air was thick with the smell of burnt fuel, scorched timber, and the acrid residue of artillery shells. Across the battered villages and frozen fields, Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his T-34 crews moved cautiously, aware that each engagement with the German Tiger I carried the risk of total annihilation. Months of experience at Mga had taught hard lessons, but nothing could fully prepare the Soviets for the combination of firepower, armor, and psychological impact embodied in the Tiger. Petrov convened a field briefing with surviving officers and platoon leaders. Maps were spread across a makeshift table of wooden crates, artillery reports marked with red ink. "The Tiger is a fortress, not a tank," Petrov said firmly, his breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. "It cannot be approached head-on. We must strike from the flanks, use artillery to soften positions, and never, ever expose ourselves in open fields." His men nodded, their faces pale but determined. The lesson of survival had become inseparable from the lesson of adaptation. The Red Army had begun to adjust doctrine in real time. Coordinated attacks became essential. Artillery units targeted suspected Tiger positions to immobilize or at least distract the heavy tanks, while infantry squads moved along concealed routes to exploit gaps. T-34s, once used in massed frontal formations, were now dispersed, emphasizing mobility, stealth, and rapid engagement. The Tiger's psychological impact was addressed directly. Officers encouraged crews to maintain composure under fire, to rely on calculation rather than instinctive fear. During one engagement near the village of Voronovo, Petrov's platoon encountered 3 operational Tigers, supported by a company of Panzer grenadiers. The German units advanced deliberately, the lead Tiger's 88mm gun tearing through Soviet armor with terrifying efficiency. Petrov's response was a textbook example of adaptive doctrine. T-34s advanced from multiple concealed positions. Artillery fire pinned supporting infantry, and a small detachment maneuvered to attack the Tiger's rear, while another set a trap for the supporting Panzer grenadiers. The result was mixed, but instructive. One Tiger was temporarily immobilized when its tracks dug into a frozen ditch, another withdrew under concentrated artillery fire, and the third inflicted heavy damage before finally retreating. Soviet losses were significant, but the engagement validated the emerging doctrine. Combined arms tactics, terrain exploitation, and psychological preparation could offset even the deadliest of weapons. Petrov's unit documented every detail for command. The angles of armor penetration, reload times for the 88mm gun, and mechanical vulnerabilities were recorded meticulously. These observations were sent up the chain, where Red Army engineers and strategists began to formulate more formal countermeasures. Anti-tank artillery was reallocated to critical sectors. Infantry squads received specialized training for flanking maneuvers, and new tactics emphasized surprise, mobility, and coordination over brute force. The Tiger I had, in effect, rewritten the rules of armored warfare on the Eastern Front. Soviet commanders who had relied on overwhelming numbers and frontal assaults now faced a stark reality. Technological superiority demanded new strategies. The lessons learned at Mga and Voronovo would shape training, doctrine, and engagement rules for months to come. Petrov understood that victory was no longer about sheer firepower. It was about intelligence, preparation, and the ability to exploit every advantage, no matter how small. Meanwhile, the psychological dimension continued to evolve. Soldiers who had faced the Tiger understood the terror it could inspire. Commanders worked to mitigate fear through discipline, communication, and exposure. Small successes, immobilizing a Tiger, scoring a rear hit, coordinating a successful ambush, reinforced confidence. Petrov emphasized that understanding the enemy's strengths was essential, but exploiting its weaknesses was the key to survival. By late October, the Soviets had begun to integrate these lessons into larger operational planning. Combined arms task forces were created specifically for anti-Tiger operations, emphasizing flexibility, intelligence gathering, and rapid response. Engineers developed specialized mines and explosive charges designed to target heavy armor, while artillery units practiced concentrated barrages intended to suppress and distract. Every element of Soviet planning now incorporated the hard-won knowledge gained from months of brutal encounters. The battlefield outside Leningrad remained a deadly crucible. Tigers continued to strike fear into Soviet units, but the Red Army had begun to adapt. Lieutenant Petrov and his men moved with purpose. Their tactics honed, their resolve hardened. The Tiger Front, while still formidable, could no longer operate with impunity. The combination of intelligence, preparation, and adaptation had begun to level the playing field. As night fell over the frozen fields, Petrov surveyed the ruins of another engagement. Fires smoldered across the landscape, and the silhouettes of abandoned Tigers and wreck with T-34s dotted the horizon. The cost had been high, but the lessons were invaluable. Doctrine had been rewritten in fire and steel, forged under the unrelenting pressure of armored warfare. The Soviets had endured the shock of the WWII, and from that shock, a new understanding of modern combat emerged, one that would shape the outcome of battles for months to come. Section 6. The Turning Point at Leningrad, November 3rd, 1942. Leningrad Front, outskirts of Sinyavino Heights. The wind carried a biting chill from Lake Ladoga, and frost coated the remnants of destroyed buildings and churned up terrain. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov, now seasoned by weeks of encounters with the WWII, peered through his binoculars at the approaching German formation. Among the Panzer IVs, the familiar hulking silhouettes of the Tigers moved with deliberate menace. Yet Petrov felt a cautious sense of preparedness. Months of adaptation, learning, and improvisation had honed the Red Army's approach to these formidable adversaries. Petrov's platoon had been assigned to support an infantry advance aimed at clearing a key road leading into Leningrad. Reconnaissance indicated 2 operational Tigers positioned on high ground, dominating the main approach. The challenge was clear. Frontal engagement would be suicidal. Instead, Petrov coordinated with artillery and infantry, devising a multi-pronged attack designed to exploit terrain and distract the heavy tanks. Smoke screens would obscure movement, while infantry squads attempted to encircle the flanks. The first engagement commenced as the Tigers fired at long range, their 80mm shells tearing through T-34 formations with precision. Petrov's crews took cover behind ditches and ruined buildings, returning fire cautiously. Artillery barrages exploded nearby, forcing the Tigers to adjust positions, exposing their flanks. It was a tense dance of fire and maneuver, where one miscalculation could result in catastrophic loss. Soviet gunners learned to calculate angles, track timings, and coordinate multiple weapons systems, a stark contrast to the improvisation of earlier encounters at Mga. During the chaos, one Tiger attempted to push through the central road. Petrov signaled a detachment to execute a flanking maneuver through a wooded ravine. The T-34s moved stealthily, using the terrain to approach the Tiger's rear, where its armor was less formidable. Infantry squads armed with anti-tank rifles and satchel charges followed closely, ready to exploit any opportunity. The combined assault demonstrated the culmination of hard-won lessons: coordination, discipline, and an understanding of the Tiger's strengths and limitations. The engagement was brutal. The Tigers fired accurately and with devastating effect, destroying multiple Soviet tanks and pinning down infantry. Yet Petrov's maneuver succeeded. One Tiger was immobilized when its track snagged on hidden debris, and a well-placed artillery barrage forced another to retreat temporarily. The psychological impact on both sides was palpable. German crews, accustomed to domination, faced organized resistance that exploited every weakness, while Soviet troops, once overwhelmed by fear, now advanced with calculated confidence. Throughout the day, repeated clashes solidified new tactical doctrine. T-34 units learned to avoid predictable patterns, emphasizing mobility and the use of terrain for cover. Infantry synchronized with armor, using suppressive fire and flanking maneuvers to maximize effect. Artillery coordination became more precise, with observers relaying real-time adjustments to maximize damage. Every engagement reinforced the principle that even the formidable Tiger could be countered through ingenuity, planning, and teamwork. By evening, the battlefield bore the scars of yet another ferocious encounter. Fires burned in ruined villages, twisted steel littered the fields, and the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning fuel. Petrov's men regrouped, exhausted but determined. The Tigers had inflicted heavy damage, yet the Soviets had gained invaluable intelligence and experience. Every misfire, every immobilized tank, every successful flank was catalogued for future operations. The Red Army's understanding of Tiger vulnerabilities had deepened. The turning point at Leningrad was more than tactical, it was psychological. Soviet units had learned that fear alone could not dictate the outcome of engagements. Preparation, discipline, and adaptation could neutralize even the most terrifying weapons. Petrov recognized that the Tiger Punt, while still a powerful instrument of war, was not invincible. It could be studied, its weaknesses exploited, and its psychological impact mitigated through training and coordination. As night fell over the snow-covered fields, the roar of distant artillery echoed across the landscape. The Tigers remained a formidable threat, but the Red Army had evolved. Doctrine had been rewritten, tactics refined, and soldiers hardened. The early encounters that had once seemed catastrophic had become the foundation for resilience and innovation. Leningrad, under siege and under fire, had survived the shock of the WWII, and in doing so, had begun to master the art of armoured warfare under the harshest conditions imaginable. Section 7, Engineering Countermeasures and Adaptation, November 12, 1942. Leningrad Front, outskirts of Schlisselburg. The snow had turned to a fine, icy drizzle, coating every surface in a slippery sheen. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov reviewed the latest intelligence reports alongside field engineers who had been dispatched to study Tiger wrecks, damaged armor, and captured components. The sheer size, weight, and complexity of the Tiger had initially intimidated Soviet crews, but now it offered invaluable data. Each mechanical fault, each destroyed tank, and every shell impact provided insight into how to counter the seemingly indomitable vehicle. Petrov's engineers had devised improvised anti-Tiger tactics that blended engineering ingenuity with battlefield necessity. Heavy logs and ice-filled craters were used to channel Tigers into kill zones where artillery could concentrate fire. Mines were strategically placed along likely approach routes, aimed specifically at the Tiger's tracks or suspension. Infantry squads trained with newly reinforced anti-tank rifles and Molotov cocktails, targeting hatches, vision slits, and engine compartments. Every adaptation was a response to the lessons learned from weeks of lethal encounters. In one tense afternoon engagement, Petrov observed a Tiger advancing through a narrow valley, its 80mm gun scanning for targets. Soviet artillery opened up with precision, forcing the Tiger to adjust its course. Hidden infantry squads along the ridge lobbed explosive charges onto the tracks. The Tiger shuddered and ground to a halt, immobilized. The German crew scrambled to repair the damage under fire, demonstrating both their discipline and the fragility of the massive machine under tactical pressure. Petrov noted that mechanical failures could be as decisive as firepower. Tigers were designed for long-range superiority, but the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front, frozen roads, mud, and constant operational stress, exposed weaknesses. Gearboxes, engines, and tracks often failed under the strain, creating windows of opportunity for the Red Army. Exploiting these required coordination, patience, and courage. A single misstep could result in catastrophic losses. Meanwhile, Red Army artillery units refined their targeting methods. Observers tracked the Tiger's movement patterns, calculated the effective range of the 88mm gun, and identified weak points on the armour. Concentrated fire from multiple guns became a preferred tactic, aiming to suppress the Tiger while infantry and tanks manoeuvred to exploit openings. Petrov's platoon began incorporating these lessons into routine drills, moving with precision, discipline, and an awareness of both the threat and opportunity presented by the Tiger. Engineers also explored technological adaptations, modifications to T-34 ammunition, reinforcement of tank hulls, and experimentation with new explosive charges reflected a growing understanding of the Tiger's vulnerabilities. Even the terrain itself became a weapon. Frozen rivers, narrow passes, and bombed-out villages were used to restrict mobility and funnel Tigers into predictable paths. The battlefield became a controlled experiment in countering technological superiority through ingenuity, adaptation, and coordination. As November progressed, the Soviet approach matured. Tigers, while still imposing and dangerous, could no longer operate with complete impunity. Petrov and his officers had developed a system: reconnaissance to identify enemy positions, artillery to suppress, infantry to flank and apply close-range pressure, and tanks to exploit openings. Each element relied on the others, demonstrating that the solution to the Tiger's dominance was not a single weapon or tactic, but an integrated combined arms strategy. The psychological dimension also evolved. Soldiers who had once frozen under the threat of the Tiger now approached engagements with calculated risk. Training, experience, and exposure to controlled confrontations had built confidence. Petrov emphasized discipline and observation, understand the enemy's capabilities, anticipate behavior, and act decisively. The Tiger remained a fearsome opponent, but the Soviets had begun to master the art of countering it, turning fear into focused action. By the end of November 1942, the Leningrad front had transformed its approach to armoured warfare. Tigers continued to dominate in isolated engagements, but Soviet forces now possessed the knowledge, tactics, and psychological preparation necessary to withstand them. Field reports, engineering assessments, and tactical drills had merged into a cohesive doctrine aimed at exploiting weaknesses while minimizing risk. The once unassailable Tiger was now a challenge to be studied, understood, and defeated through ingenuity, coordination, and relentless adaptation. Section 8. The psychological impact on both sides. December 2nd, 1942, Leningrad front, near Mga. The winter wind cut through uniforms and armour alike, leaving exposed skin raw and frozen. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov, his breath fogging in the frigid air, surveyed a landscape transformed by fire, ice, and steel. The Tigers had reshaped not only the battlefield, but the mindset of both Soviet and German troops. For the Soviets, the sheer presence of these tanks demanded a balance of fear and respect, while for the Germans, early successes were tempered by frustration at mechanical failures and unexpected Soviet adaptations. Petrov's men moved in disciplined columns, their T-34s coated in whitewash for camouflage. They had learned to anticipate the Tiger's psychological effect, both on themselves and on enemy troops. Fear could paralyze inexperienced crews, but it could also be managed through preparation, drills, and leadership. Petrov personally oversaw simulated engagements, teaching his men to maintain composure under the roar of the 88mm, to trust in combined arms coordination, and to exploit every possible vulnerability. German officers, meanwhile, noted the emerging resilience of Soviet units. Captain Otto Carius wrote in his field journal about encounters where the Soviets refused to break under the most terrifying fire, maneuvering effectively despite the deadly precision of the 88mm gun. These observations reflected a subtle shift in the operational dynamic. The Tiger's presence no longer guaranteed psychological domination. Instead, the battlefield had become a contest of nerves, anticipation, and controlled aggression. In one brutal engagement, Petrov's platoon faced a trio of operational Tigers that had been supporting an infantry advance. The initial salvo destroyed 2 T-34s, causing a momentary pause among the remaining crews. Yet training and experience prevailed. Soviet artillery adjusted fire, infantry advanced through covered routes, and T-34s maneuvered to the Tigers' flanks. The battle was a grueling test of endurance, with each side attempting to dominate through both firepower and psychological pressure. Ultimately, one Tiger was immobilized, its crew abandoning the tank under fire. The event became a case study in overcoming fear, adapting to overwhelming odds, and maintaining cohesion under extreme stress. Petrov's men also learned to read enemy behavior. German Tiger crews were cautious, methodical, and disciplined, but repeated exposure to Soviet ambushes and counterattacks forced hesitation. Observing patterns, reload cycles, preferred firing positions, and typical response times allowed Soviet commanders to plan operations with increased confidence. Understanding the psychology of the opponent became as important as understanding their technology. The human cost of these engagements was undeniable. Both sides suffered casualties, many of them gruesome, and the winter conditions amplified the suffering. Frostbite, exhaustion, and stress were constant companions. Yet for the Soviets, each encounter with the Tiger reinforced a vital lesson. Survival depended not solely on firepower, but on preparation, discipline, and the courage to act decisively under pressure. Psychological resilience became a formal part of training. Petrov instituted briefings emphasizing mental readiness, recognition of fear, and the importance of maintaining focus. Crews practiced firing drills under simulated stress, coordinated maneuvers while under observation, and rehearsed flanking and retreat procedures to mitigate panic. By the end of December, Soviet units displayed a remarkable combination of fear-informed caution and aggressive initiative, directly countering the initial terror inspired by the Tiger was. For the Germans, the psychological dynamic was equally complex. While the Tiger remained a symbol of technological superiority, repeated encounters with prepared and adaptive Soviet forces caused frustration and a recalibration of expectations. Field reports highlighted that Tigers, while powerful, could be neutralized through tactical ingenuity. The combination of mechanical failure, coordinated assault, and psychological resilience presented a new challenge, one that German crews had not anticipated when the Tiger first rolled into Leningrad. The winter months thus became a period of dual adaptation. Soviets hardened their resolve, developed combined arms strategies, and turned the Tiger's dominance into a learning experience. German crews faced both the physical limitations of their machines and the evolving competence of their opponents. The battlefield had shifted. Fear remained, but it no longer dictated outcomes. Knowledge, coordination, and discipline had begun to counterbalance technological superiority. By mid-December, Petrov reflected on the transformation. The Tiger I, once a terrifying symbol of German engineering, had become a teacher. Its strengths and vulnerabilities provided lessons in both tactics and psychology. Soviet units had emerged from weeks of bloody engagements not merely as survivors, but as practitioners of a new form of armored warfare, one capable of facing even the most formidable weaponry with intelligence, coordination, and courage. Section 9. The First Winter Offensive Against the Tigers, December 22nd, Leningrad Front. Approaches to Schlisselburg. The dawn broke pale and cold, the sky a sheet of iron grey. Snow crunched under the tracks of T-34s, and the air was filled with the distant roar of artillery and the sharp whistle of incoming shells. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov's platoon, prepared for their first coordinated winter offensive, aimed explicitly at engaging Tiger-WWII formations with the new tactics developed over the preceding months. The combination of intelligence, engineering adaptation, and psychological preparation would be tested under the harshest conditions yet. Reconnaissance reports indicated 2 Tiger platoons entrenched along a frozen riverbank, their positions fortified with machine guns, field artillery, and obstacles. Petrov studied the maps carefully, noting likely paths for flanking and the terrain's subtle variations. Frost coated every surface, obscuring visibility and making movement treacherous. A miscalculation could trap Soviet tanks in ice-crusted gullies, leaving them exposed to the Tiger's deadly 88mm fire. Every step required precision, patience, and trust in coordination. The assault began with artillery barrages designed to suppress the Tigers and obscure their vision. Smoke and snow swirled together, creating a surreal, disorienting battlefield. Infantry squads advanced under cover, placing mines and explosive charges along probable escape routes. T-34s moved along hidden gullies, using terrain to approach the Tiger's flanks. The German crews, alert and disciplined, responded with precise fire, knocking out 2 Soviet tanks in the initial moments. Despite the losses, Petrov's forces continued, maintaining cohesion and following the carefully planned maneuvers. One Tiger became the focal point of the Soviet flanking maneuver. Petrov's team coordinated with infantry and artillery observers, tracking the tank's movement and adjusting fire in real time. Explosive charges targeted its tracks, and a concentrated artillery barrage distracted the crew, forcing them to adjust position repeatedly. Finally, a well-timed shot from a T-34's 76.2mm gun struck the rear armour, damaging the engine and immobilising the vehicle. The crew attempted emergency repairs under fire, but were ultimately forced to abandon the tank. The winter offensive demonstrated the culmination of months of adaptation. Coordination among infantry, armour and artillery had matured into a cohesive system capable of neutralising the Tiger's advantages. Soviet crews, once terrorised by the sight of these massive vehicles, now executed complex manoeuvres with precision, exploiting mechanical weaknesses, terrain, and coordinated firepower. The battle showcased the evolution of doctrine and the practical application of lessons learned from weeks of costly engagements. Field reports following the engagement highlighted several key insights. Tigers, while formidable in open terrain, were vulnerable when maneuverability was restricted. Mechanical failures, particularly in freezing conditions, could be exploited. Psychological preparedness was critical. Crews who maintained composure and followed coordinated plans could survive and even triumph against superior firepower. These findings would inform future operations across the Eastern Front. Petrov's men suffered losses, but the offensive had strategic value beyond the immediate battlefield. The engagement demonstrated to the Soviet High Command that Tiger Push formations, while dangerous, could be effectively countered through planning, coordination, and adaptive tactics. It validated the combined arms approach, emphasized the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance, and highlighted the critical role of psychological resilience in high-stakes armored engagements. By evening, the frozen fields were littered with wreckage, T-34s scorched, Tigers immobilized, and infantry casualties scattered across the snow. Yet amidst the destruction, the Red Army had gained confidence and clarity. The Tiger was, for all its power and reputation, was no longer an insurmountable obstacle. Soviet forces had demonstrated the ability to learn, adapt, and execute complex operations under extreme conditions, turning fear into strategic advantage. Petrov, surveying the battlefield from a ridgeline, understood the significance of the day. The winter offensive had not destroyed every Tiger, but it had rewritten the rules of engagement. The balance of power on the Leningrad front had shifted subtly, yet decisively. Knowledge, discipline, and coordination had proven more potent than fear alone. The lessons of Mga, Voronovo, and Schlisselburg were now solidified into operational doctrine, ensuring that the Red Army could confront the Tiger Poise with growing confidence and lethal efficiency. Section 10. Lessons Learned and the Evolution of Soviet Armored Doctrine. January 5, 1943. Leningrad Front, Command Post near Sinyavino. The first snows of the new year blanketed the battered landscape in an eerie white calm. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his officers convened for a strategy meeting, the room dimly lit by a single kerosene lamp. Maps and field reports were scattered across the table, documenting every encounter with the Tiger I over the previous 3 months. The scale of adaptation, improvisation, and tactical evolution was remarkable. The Tiger had forced the Red Army to confront not just a superior weapon, but the limitations of its own doctrine, and the Soviets had responded with ingenuity and determination. Petrov began by reviewing operational records from Mga, Voronovo, Shlisselburg, and surrounding sectors. Each engagement with the Tiger I offered insights into its vulnerabilities: restricted mobility on uneven terrain, susceptibility of tracks and rear armor, and the limits of its 88mm gun in rapid, multi-target scenarios. Soviet forces had also discovered the critical value of coordinated artillery suppression, infantry flanking maneuvers, and concentrated T-34 fire from hidden positions. The lessons were clear, though hard-earned. Technology alone did not guarantee battlefield dominance. The psychological dimension remained pivotal. Petrov addressed the officers directly, emphasizing the importance of discipline, morale, and calculated aggression. Soldiers who could maintain composure under fire were more likely to exploit weaknesses, anticipate enemy movements, and survive encounters with the Tiger. Training now included simulated Tiger engagements, stress drills, and rehearsed maneuvers to ingrain combined arms tactics into instinctive responses. The front line had become a living laboratory for armored warfare, testing both human resilience and tactical innovation. Meanwhile, the Soviets had refined their countermeasures. Mines, improvised explosive devices, and anti-tank rifles had become standard elements of preparation. Terrain was systematically exploited to limit Tiger mobility, funneling the heavy tanks into kill zones. Engineers worked tirelessly to adapt T-34s with reinforced armor and improved ammunition types, while artillery units honed precision fire techniques designed specifically for the Tiger's weaknesses. Every innovation reflected a deepening understanding of mechanized warfare and the imperative of turning technological inferiority into strategic advantage. Field commanders reported the cumulative effect of these adaptations. Tigers, once capable of dominating engagements through raw firepower and intimidation, were increasingly met with organized resistance that could neutralize their advantages. While losses remained high, each encounter produced valuable intelligence: timing of reloads, angles of penetration, mechanical vulnerabilities, and behavioral patterns under fire. This knowledge was disseminated across the front, forming the basis of a doctrine that combined intelligence, preparation, and coordinated execution. Petrov reflected on the evolution of armored warfare at Leningrad. The Tiger I, formidable and imposing, had inadvertently accelerated the professionalization of Soviet tank operations. Commanders who had once relied on massed frontal assaults now emphasized maneuver, observation, and combined arms coordination. Crews understood that survival required not just courage, but skillful application of strategy and exploitation of terrain and enemy weaknesses. Every engagement with the Tiger became both a test and a lesson, shaping the Red Army into a more sophisticated and adaptive fighting force. By mid-January, the impact of these lessons extended beyond the immediate front. Soviet tank doctrine was undergoing a systemic transformation. Training programs incorporated Tiger countermeasures, intelligence protocols were revised to anticipate enemy armor movements, and combined arms coordination became standard procedure. The initial terror, inspired by the Tiger, had evolved into structured study, adaptation, and operational mastery. Leningrad had become a crucible, not just of survival, but of innovation under fire. Even German crews recognized the shift. Reports noted increased caution among Soviet tank units, the integration of artillery with infantry maneuvers, and the growing proficiency of T-34 crews in exploiting terrain and mechanical weaknesses. The Tiger's reputation as an unstoppable force was increasingly tempered by the realization that its opponents were learning, adapting, and countering with ingenuity. As the winter deepened, Petrov observed his men executing complex maneuvers with calm efficiency. The T-34s advanced, retreated, and repositioned under fire. Infantry flanked and assaulted with precision, and artillery coordinated suppressive barrages seamlessly. The lessons of Mga, Voronovo, and Schlisselburg had coalesced into a coherent doctrine. The Tiger Y remained a lethal weapon, but the Red Army had transformed fear into knowledge, shock into strategy, and despair into effective combat performance. In the frozen silence of January nights, as the front line slept fitfully, Petrov contemplated the broader significance. The Tiger had challenged every assumption about armoured warfare. It had forced adaptation, inspired innovation, and reshaped doctrine in the crucible of Leningrad. What had begun as a nightmare of firepower and intimidation had evolved into a catalyst for resilience and tactical sophistication. The lessons learned would not only influence future engagements around Leningrad, but across the Eastern Front, ensuring that the Red Army was prepared to meet the Tiger Sun and its successors with intelligence, discipline, and determination. The Soviets had survived, adapted, and grown stronger. The Tiger Fum, for all its might, had met a force that refused to be broken by fear alone. Knowledge, coordination, and unyielding courage had turned the tide, proving that even the most formidable weapon could be countered with ingenuity, preparation, and the relentless spirit of soldiers who refused to surrender.